Welcome back, fellow Jazz Bums. Today we are unbelievably excited to have Steve Guttenberg here, the Audiophiliac.
Thank you.
Before we get into it, please like and subscribe. We also have the Jazz Bums Discord, so come and join us there. We'll drop an invite link in the description below, and we live stream every Friday at 8 p.m. So come and hang out with us there as well. With that, I'm going to kick it over to Felipe to get us started.
Thank you, Mike. So today in the show, he's been doing movie projection. He sold hi-fi. He works as a producer for Chesky Records. He's wrote for several publications, and currently he's one of the most successful and great hi-fi channels on YouTube. Without further introduction, welcome. Thanks for joining us, Steve Guttenberg, the
Thank you.
Audiophiliac.
I would point out that I was once the most successful audio YouTube channel.
The pioneer.
I was the pioneer, but I was also the #1 for a long time. And then other people like Darko went past me, and Andrew Robinson passed me. And you know what? I enjoy not being #1. Takes the pressure off. You know, it's,
Absolutely.
oh my God, all these people chasing me and stuff. So it's like, it's all right.
So
Does this change my life if I'm not #1, if I'm only #3 or 4? It's
I think
fine.
that's good company to be in.
That's good.
So that said, it looks like you started on YouTube. I mean, you started uploading videos on YouTube around 7 years ago or so.
Yeah.
What was like the approach to that? Were you just kind of like, what was the initial thinking of testing out YouTube for this type of content around hi-fi and audiophile commentary?
Well, I mean, it didn't actually start on purpose, which is one way to start. It's like I didn't start a YouTube channel to have a YouTube channel. I started a YouTube channel with an idea that where I was working at the time, CNET.com, I was a guest on a podcast that was sometimes video, sometimes audio only for 10 years. It was called the 404, and it was a tech talk/comedy show. It was an hour a day. It started out 5 days a week. And I was a frequent guest. And I liked being, when it was video, I liked it both ways. When it was video, I thought, this is really cool. You know, I'm having a good time. The camera's way over there. I don't even know where the camera is. It was in this, smaller studio and then a big studio. And I liked this. And I did this for years, being a guest on this show. And then a little thing, I should ask CNET to give me my own show. I can do this without the guys whose show I'm on. I can do, because when I was a guest on the 404, they would just let me take over that episode. It was pretty much me doing all the talking. So I've already proved that I could do that. So I go to my boss, I go to the brass and say, I want to do this. And they go, make a pilot episode. So I made a pilot episode. And they're like, well, we don't really understand what you're trying to do. And I said, it doesn't matter what you think. I'm sorry. But it matters that the people who like me would want to watch this stuff. And then they made a second pilot episode. And then I thought, I got a better. I'm just going to start a YouTube channel to show you what it is and show you that I can quickly, get an audience. And that way I can have my podcast on CNET. That was the plan. But a month into my YouTube channel experience, I thought, wait a minute, hold on, I'm doing this backwards. I don't need CNET to give me one. I could just do it by myself. And if I do it by myself, I own it. If I was doing it for CNET, it would be their property and they could monetize it any way they wanted. So I stopped asking to give me a show on CNET. And I decided to make one video a day, short, unedited, 3 minutes, 5-minute videos, 7 days a week for at least the first 6 months. So about audio, music, audio, blah, blah, blah. So I would, if someone was looking on YouTube for information about audiophile, high-end audio stuff, they would find me really fast. And that strategy worked great because there were no other audio review channels except Paul McGowan, PS Audios, but he didn't do reviews because he owns an audio company. He just, he talked about audio and he was really good at it. So I didn't have any competition. So it grew really, really fast, but I couldn't maintain 7 days a week of making videos.
That's a lot.
So I slowed down to 5 days a week. And I stayed at 5 days for a while, and then it was 4, and then it was 3, and then it was 2, and now it's 1. But it's a fun thing to do, to make videos. And the idea of, as we talked earlier about this communication from the person in front of the camera or the microphone and the person watching or listening, I love that idea. I love that it's so intimate. And it's interesting that during the COVID days, when all the hosts of TV shows were doing it at home, basically doing what we're doing right now, talking to a phone or a camera, that they didn't need the set and the audience and all that other crap. They could just do it because they had the talent and the charisma to speak to their audience. It didn't require all that other stuff. And then after COVID, it went back to the way it was before. But that intimacy from performer, talent, whatever, to the person watching, I love that. I really do. And I've been doing it coming up on 8 years, and it doesn't get old, actually, because I'm always trying to figure out how to perfect that idea of how I talk to the people out there.
Yeah, Steve, I remember that transition. I used to read you religiously on CNET, and when the channel started, then you kind of, I still remember, like, I think your last column on CNET, so I'm gonna take a break and maybe one day, but now I'm gonna
Right.
go full time on YouTube. And it's true what you say, because I usually go back to your archives and I see that you put new videos on subjects that you touched before, and they're better. I think they're better to comprehend. I watched like 3 or 4 of your videos about how to connect a subwoofer to a stereo,
Yeah.
and things get better. So you make reviews, you talk reviews, of course, but you also talk about themes sometimes. You just pick a theme and talk about it. So what's your process? It's something that you read about and say, oh, let me clarify or make it nice, or just a random thought that you have and say, I'm going to talk about this today.
Well, you use the word process. And, before I had a YouTube channel, I had a blog that was
Mhm.
called the Audiophiliac.
Yeah.
And when I was offered to do this blog for CNET, I said, I don't understand. What is a blog? It's like, is it the same thing as a column? It's a different word for column. And sort of. So anyway, they said, just try it, right? So I tried this idea of doing a column or blog. And before I said yes that I was going to do it, I was really intimidated because at that point I had to write 5 of them a week. And I thought, how am I going to come up with 5 ideas a week that are interesting? Because I was going to be paid 100% by how many people read my blog. It wasn't just like a thing, right? It was
Mhm.
100% like, you get a bigger audience, you make more money. And I was terrified that how could I do this? How could I do 250 a year and come up with good stuff? And what was fascinating is that as I was thinking about writing them, I always had ideas because I needed to. It was my job to generate ideas. So it's not like I sat down and said, what do I want to do? I just was always in the mode of coming up with another idea. And then, so when I made the transition to making videos, I was pretty sure that I could do the 7 days a week thing because I had already done it for 12 years with a blog. So I know how to just constantly generate ideas. Obviously, they're not all great ideas by a long shot, right? But if you're always in the mode of thinking to create something, you will be able to do it. The less you do that, the harder it is to do. Now that I make 1 video a week, I'm thinking, how did I do 5? How
Yeah.
did I do 2? Well, in 2023, I was making 2 videos a week. And now I think, how the hell did I do that? So the more you do, the easier it is to do more. The less you do, the harder it is to do. It seems
Mhm.
like it should be the other way around, but it's not.
Was there similar engagement with the blog and then the transition to YouTube in terms of comments or number of clicks or views? Or have you found more success with YouTube?
The whole idea of comments is really interesting because when I started the blog, they told me that I should not respond to comments. Because
Okay.
at that moment CNET was into comments. They said, but don't respond, unless it's a big problem or something, just let it go. I said, okay. And then it was amazing that there was a guy that commented on every blog and said something like, Steve Guttenberg is an idiot. Uh, you should fire him and get somebody who knows what they're talking about. And did this at this point, like 5 times a week, right? And I was like, all right, whatever. I'm not going to respond. And like a year goes by, and pretty much every blog he was putting me down. And then it's not that it bothered me or anything. I thought it was funny. So finally, I responded to him and I said, Mike, I hear what you're saying, but you know what? I think that your comments over the past year or so prove that you're an incredibly open-minded person. Because even though you disagree with everything I've ever written, you just keep coming back. So it shows that, sort of have some connection there. And I did it like that. And then he responded and said, I'm sorry that I said all those terrible things about you. So that was it. So I learned, depending on the situation, that when people are trolling and stuff, do that sort of thing, depending on how truly nasty they are. Just compliment them. And sometimes that disarms them. But no, you asked about comments. So anyway, the thing about having the blog, it's funny that even though the CNET world is a hell of a lot smaller than YouTube, the intensity of what I did on CNET was pretty powerful. And I got like granular information about how many people were reading everything I ever wrote. So the feedback, of everything I ever wrote for CNET, because I got a report every single day, 365 days a year. So to see that, what was happening, because most writers don't know what people really think of them. They might see 20 comments or something, or 10 letters to a magazine like Stereophile. I see hundreds of them all the time. So it's not like I'm going to change, but on the other hand, knowing what they're thinking is actually really, really helpful. I like having comments,
Now, will you
unless
engage,
they cross a line.
will you respond to questions in the comments
If there is an easy and obvious question, because the thing is, because
Okay.
there's so many of them, it just takes too much time to answer them. But if it's something that I can just knock out really fast, I do.
Yeah, that's totally reasonable.
And I think in hi-fi, not only channels, but publications, discussion forums, people get so passionate, inflamed about things, right? So they can be so sharp, and then so even about things they don't know about is usually what they know the best. So I never heard of this, but you should definitely buy that one because this one that you have sucks, and things
Right,
like that.
exactly. Yes. That's one of the funniest things about doing what I do is I do a review. A lot of times the product isn't really even out yet, or it just came out. And people seem to have very strong opinions about something that they never heard. And I say, but I've actually heard it and you haven't. So for the time being, let's assume that I'm right. And then when you hear it, you can say, oh, Guttenberg was completely off the mark. But up to that point, especially if you keep coming back, maybe you should give me some credence that I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's okay. It's all good. Doesn't matter whether they
So
do. I get paid by how many people watch me. So even if people hate watching me, I love it because I'm getting paid. And I used to say, I'm getting paid and you're not. So it's a good balance, right?
So do you think people make those assumptions based on measurements most of the times, or a name brand? What do you think?
It's all of those things. It is measurements, especially if it's been measured, elsewhere, the thing that I'm reviewing, and they say, oh, it measures like crap or something like that. So, if that's the way you go, then you shouldn't buy things that you don't think measure well. I don't care. It makes zero difference to me. But everybody knows that I don't care about measurements.
Right.
And I have many stories about proving the other side of the street, the people who are into measurements, proving them wrong. Now, because I can always say, I'm giving you my 100% subjective opinion about the sound of this thing, right? And you could say, that's just your opinion, blah, 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 but we have science, we have facts, we have measurements to prove that this is good or this is bad. And I said, but here's the thing, it doesn't actually mean anything. If it measures better, it does not correlate always to people liking the sound of the thing.
Right.
The opposite, that things that measure poorly, that people can like it even though it doesn't measure well. So it's not really, there's no real strong relationship. But if you believe that there is a strong relationship, you should only buy things that measure well. But the other side of the fence of the measuring question is some people that design audio only do it by measurement and very little listening.
Mhm.
And I've had conversations with engineers over the years who do that. And I remember thinking, Yeah, I can tell that you never actually listened to this thing, you know? I was telling a story the other day to somebody about a very large speaker company had an introduction of a new line of speakers. And I went out to see to their factory, and they were telling me about all the work and years they put into measuring and perfecting this line of speakers. And they just talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. And I hate being at those things, but I was sort of a prisoner, so I couldn't just get out. So I had to sit through 2.5 hours of someone telling me how well this thing measured. And then we went into a next room where we listened to it. And I thought, with this big buildup, I should hear like a total breakthrough. This should be absolutely staggering. And it wasn't. And the thing was, I gave it a review and I gave it, it's okay. It's not the worst sounding thing. It's not the best. But in the end, the thing that was so interesting is that that product never had any traction in the market. No one cared. And I made it a point sometimes to ask people who sell, vintage audio, like, what about that stuff? Does anybody care? Is that sought after, even though it's not like super visible right now? And they say, no one ever asks about it. And that's like another example. Like, you could say, I perfected the sound of this thing, in this case, a speaker, but does it connect with people is the question. It does or it doesn't.
So to that point, what makes a system for you engaging?
I like it. No, it's because things that you feel, if you play a familiar recording, which is one of the best ways to do this, right? And I say a familiar recording that actually sounds reasonably good, because there's lots of music I like Neil Young's Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere album, which is a terrible recording, but I really love the music. But in this case, if you use a recording that sounds pretty good and you listen to it over a great system and you hear things in it that you never noticed before, you never noticed, like with this Neil Young recording, how Neil sounded on the acoustic tracks more vulnerable. He sounded more like he was really present, like he was thinking about the words. And I'm playing this recording and I'm thinking, I've never heard it quite like that. Like, I've never heard it was a speaker, and I've never heard a speaker do that thing exactly. Well, that goes into the really good quality, that goes into the good column. Like, that is fantastic, right? And if I play a speaker that um, is losing things, I can't hear what I know is in the recording, that would be a bad speaker, right? So it's again, this is my opinion, and putting my opinions into words and describing it, well, in the hope that the people watching are understanding the vocabulary. And that's a pretty iffy thing to do. That's very, very difficult to pull off. When I sold audio, and I did it for 16 years, and I could sit next to the person who was listening to the thing, that, let's say, the speaker I was playing for them, and they could play some music that they knew, and then have a little discussion. They'd say, "Oh, it's too bright. I can't hear this." Okay, let me try this other speaker. It was a dialogue between me and them, and we could try different things. That's the best way to do it. But unfortunately, that's not the way most people get to buy things anymore. So you have to go by reviews. And as I did in a recent video where I said, are all reviews bullshit? And people said, oh yeah, most of them are. I said, well, and in this video that I made about are reviews bullshit, the point of it is that each person needs to find reviewers that they can relate to, who have a track record with them, that you find out you have similar tastes and you're on the same wavelength. Then reviews are not bullshit. But if you just take a random review of a product of someone you don't really follow or know, and they give it a good review or a bad review, it doesn't mean anything, because you don't understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
So the people who follow me and come back, apparently it's because we are somehow connected that way, and then the reviews are useful to them. And
Absolutely.
that's the best it can be, right? In terms of a review
Yeah, no, that I
of
totally.
anything, of wine, of baseball games, whatever. It's all, you have to find people that you feel some simpatico with.
So when selecting something to review, um, the thinking of if you like it or if you dislike it, the impact that may have on an organization or a company. I just wanted to kind of get your thinking around that, because I know that there are some other reviewers that I've heard just talk about that. The reason why a lot of the things they review is positive is because they really don't want to put too much negative stuff out, and they would kind of prefer to focus on the good things that they find, that they're reviewing in the market. So, do you have any philosophy behind that, or uh, decision making that you do when you decide to put a review out there?
Well, a lot of people have criticized me that I don't do outright negative reviews. And well, I don't do outright negative reviews because it's my channel. But when I worked for other people, I did negative reviews because they told me, review this thing. They didn't say, do you like it or do you want to? They would just say, here's what you're going to do. And I would do it. In those cases, I would do negative reviews. But now that I get to pick and choose, I don't want to spend time working on a review of a product that's bad. I don't think it serves anybody, Although this was a really funny one. When the first Apple wireless earbuds or whatever came out, Apple is really tough with reviews. Like even when I worked at CNET, I could not easily get Apple things to talk about. It's like it's a giant wall around Apple, right? So I thought, well, everybody's talking about these wireless earbuds. I'm just going to go to an Apple store, and when it's not too busy, and go and play a bunch of tunes and take notes and do a review. And I did this review, and I was the only one that had done a negative review on the earbuds. So review goes up, and it was doing amazing numbers. It was like so incredible because I did something that no one else had done, And I don't think the people at Apple are, were weeping or worrying about like what I had to say about their product. It wasn't going to make any difference. So that was a lot of fun. But one time I did, and that was for my YouTube. It might not have been for my, I don't remember. I've done so many, but anyway, I did that review. But I did one of a Bose product, and Bose and the corporation and Bose and me, we did not get along so well. And I said something negative about Bose, and they had a freaking shit fit over it. Oh, it was a review of a very expensive but not very good home theater in a box. So this was not the YouTube channel. This is definitely for CNET. And it wasn't my blog on CNET. It was a review. And they were really angry about it. And I said, well, I just said most of the problem was the subwoofer. This little puny little subwoofer was not cutting it. This was a relatively expensive system, like $2,000 or $3,000. And I said, there's many other systems that you could buy for this much money that sound way better. So Bose went nuts. And they said, well, how big of a room was it? And I said, well, I don't know. It was probably 12 by 17 feet or something like that. And they said, well, that room's too big. You need to put it in a much smaller room. And I said, really? How small? And it was some ridiculous number, like 150 square feet. And I said, well, if you'd like, I'll review it again and say this system only works in rooms that are 150 square feet or smaller. If will make you feel better about me saying bad things in a big room, there's your solution to your problem. They said, we'll get back to you, and that never happened. But my favorite one though about negative, and this is also at CNET, not for the YouTube channel. There was this format called Dolby Pro Logic Z. And it was like Atmos before Atmos existed. It was height information in recordings, in movies. And I hadn't heard it. It was introduced at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. I wasn't there to hear it, but all the press, everybody was buzzing how amazing Dolby Pro Logic Z is. Of course, I doubt that you guys ever heard of Dolby Pro Logic Z. So anyway, they're going all nuts over it. And I get a receiver, an Onkyo receiver that decoded Pro Logic Z. I get a pair of height channel speakers. I set the system up. I listened to it and I said, absolutely, it does not work at all. Even if you're listening for it, it's like so nothing that it's not really relevant to anything.
Mm.
And Onkyo and the speaker company were very upset, and they demanded a redo. And they said, we're going to send our technicians to CNET to do the setup because maybe Guttenberg screwed it up. And I said, first of all, I set it up with auto setup as per the instructions. So I did it as a consumer would. And when I didn't hear anything from the high channels in movies, I manually turned the high channels up to the maximum to see if that would do it. And I still couldn't really tell. But if you want to do this again, we'll do it again. And
Mm.
I just said to my editor, I said, so I'm going to get paid twice to do this. He said, yeah, I'll get paid a second time. I said, oh, good, this is going to be fun. So I said, here's what we're going to do. I'm not going to listen to it. We're just going to have random people in the CNET office listen to it. And this is with people from Onkyo in the room and people from the speaker company in the room. And I'm just going to tell them, this is not going to be a blind test. I'm going to tell them when the high channels are on, and I'm going to tell them when I turn them off. And I asked people, say, did you hear that difference? I just turned them on. Can you tell that it's on? Okay, now I'm going to turn them off. Can you tell that they're off? No one could tell.
Oh,
And I got to do a negative review even more because I said, this is why we're doing this review. And these are not my opinions. This is people that I'm polling basically about the difference. And then, you know what happened? Dolby Pro Logic Z just
yeah.
went away.
Just to bring things into jazz, I was kind of playing around with, or Felipe and I were kind of playing around with the idea of how there is kind of like a nice symmetry between jazz and audiophile in the audiophile world,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
you have really well recorded music. Where if you're an audiophile, you may gravitate towards jazz music because you like that high quality
Mhm.
analog format. And then also, if you're a jazz person, you gravitate to become an audiophile because you're hearing really good sound and you want to continue doing that.
Right.
So any thoughts on kind of like on that, or just kind of the approach of how people kind of come to discover audiophile, like this audiophile world, or jazz music in general?
Mhm.
Well, those are different things. Discovering jazz is something else. I think most people either, are exposed to music through their parents or their friends, and they go, "Oh, I like
Mhm.
that," I'm drawn to that, or you're not. I spent a lot of my life trying to get people, even long before I was a writer, to turn people onto jazz, even make tapes and stuff. And most people, it's not for them. They want pop music mostly, or
Yeah.
music. So it's a certain type of person that would be interested in jazz anyway, right? So once
Mhm.
they're into it, I mean, it runs the gamut of someone who has 20,000 LPs, but they have a really crappy hi-fi system. It's like it doesn't follow that just because they have a lot of records that they're going to want to hear them sound better or different. I mean, some yes, but most of the time no. Um, so, but I think audiophiles being drawn to jazz, in other words, going in the other direction, that you have a nice system and you're looking for music to play on it, and you discover that jazz recordings, because they tend to be recorded live in a studio, there's not as much overdubbing and processing and compression and equalization and all that other stuff, that it tends to sound better because it's less messed with. Yeah, that definitely happens. So it definitely goes in that direction.
Yeah. So Steve, now talking live in the studio recording jazz, how was your experience working with Chesky? And in your opinion, why made those records so successful, those recordings, in terms of sound quality, in terms like they have something, that extra sauce that you can hear in those recordings. What do you attribute it to, do you think?
Well, I think that that David Chesky actually had a record deal with Columbia Records in, I would say, I guess early '80s or something like that. So he made a record, a jazz record with the Brecker brothers were on the record. He had like good band, and he didn't like it because he felt like what I'm putting out as a musician, playing piano and writing the tunes, that wasn't in the recordings that he was, making for Columbia. So he said,
Mhm.
I can do this better myself. That's where it started for Chesky. So it's a guy who's a passionate musician, but also has technical skills, and he knew other people that he could form a team with to make records that were closer to what he wanted them to sound like. That's where it all started from. And the early records, were engineered by Bob Katz, who was a friend of mine, which is how I got involved with Chesky Records, because I asked him, hey, I said, I'd like to hang out. I've never been in a recording studio before. And in the early days of Chesky, almost all the sessions were done at RCA, or well, by then BMG, but RCA Studio A, which was a big studio. I mean, they recorded symphony orchestras in there. And it was interesting that David and Bobcat selected that studio as the place to start, because usually if you're recording, a quartet or something, you don't need to be in a room that's, 50 feet long. But that's what they did. And they decided to record with just one microphone, an AKG C24. And just basically the mix, when you're and live to 2-track, there's no like mixing board that's used. You're just basically moving the musicians closer and further away from the microphone to adjust their balance. And so they were and record to analog tape and digital simultaneously. And so it was as pure as it could be recorded in that kind of environment. And then maybe a year or two into that story, we also started to make recordings in churches in New York City, because churches basically have much better acoustics than recording studios do. It was just a beautiful thing for me to be a part of, seeing how records are made. Now, these are not records as most people think of, with a big studio, with a big console, with all the faders and all that stuff. This isn't that kind of record making. This is keeping it as pure and clear, and really, really, really being motivated to get exactly what happened at the session down on tape or on zeros and ones. And that was a thrill. That was so much fun to go out into the studio, hear the band, come back in, when we were setting up and everything, in the studio, hearing the band play, going into the control room, hearing it in the early days over BMW 801s, and going back and forth and saying, I don't know, I don't think the piano is, prominent enough in the mix. So, okay, we're going to move the microphone a little closer to the piano. This just balancing act of moving the mic or moving the musicians. It was a thrill. It was an absolute thrill. And then when Chesky expanded to record Brazilian music, first with Ana Karam, so we're doing vocals and stuff, that was a different kind of incredible thing. And we did a really, maybe it was the first, you guys know who she is, Ana Karam, Brazilian pop singer. So anyway, we're doing this record with her, and I think it was David who knew Antonio Carlos Jobim well enough to invite him to the session. And amazingly enough, he came. And I didn't even know who he was. But I got to say, as soon as he walked into the studio, I was like, this guy is the real deal. He ain't fooling around. This was intense. And I remember he said, we were told, well, all he really cares about is that he's going to be smoking cigarettes, which is not usually done in recording studios. And he needs a certain brand of whiskey. And he doesn't want all the lights on. He just wants candles illuminating the space around the piano and stuff. And so David had all those things ready to go and smoking cigarettes through the whole thing. And it was incredible. I mean, and he just nailed it, and he is so inspired so much that it just elevated the session. And they did a couple of songs together. So that was a real thrill.
So that experience there, that's a really unique perspective to be able to produce and engineer. Does that help influence when you're reviewing either gear or new albums that are coming out or anything
Absolutely,
like that?
because I get to, when I refer reviewing gear, I don't talk about it in most reviews because it would be boring just to repeat the same thing over and over again. But I tend to use Chesky recordings as one of my references because I've been to many of them. So I do, in some form, know what's really in the recording. So how much I'm getting back of that coming out of the system that I'm playing is actually really important. So yes, so those are, in my sense, reference recordings for me. And also, it's a fascinating thing about making records is that David and Bob Katz insisted on making recordings without any dynamic range compression. And what was incredible is that when audiophiles were given these recordings to listen to, they said they weren't dynamic enough, when in fact they were as dynamic as you could make a record. What audiophiles tended to be thinking is that compressed music, which is almost all of it, what they ever get to hear, right? That is dynamic, but it's the opposite. When they're here, they want punchy, they want this like hard hitting stuff. That's what compression does. That's why people like compression.
Yeah, yeah.
But then compression got this dirty word, especially among audiophiles. Oh, it's bad, it's compressed. So when we give music that isn't compressed, that means that the average level of the recording is lower. That's what it is. So when it gets loud, it gets loud. If it's loud all the time, which is what compression is, or louder all the time,
Yeah.
but pleasant to listen to, especially if that's all you've ever heard your entire life, they think that's dynamic. And when you give them music that isn't compressed, they think it's compressed.
Yeah.
So it's actually all backwards.
Yeah.
So it was really frustrating. And we even tried once we used to make these samplers, and we did a sampler disc where we took a recording, and one track was it uncompressed, and then the next track was the same music, a little compressed, and the next one was more compressed. And people liked the ones that were more compressed.
Mm.
It's like, wait, you're saying you want music that isn't compressed and equalized, which Chesky didn't do. And we give it to you, and then you think it needs to be.
Mhm.
That was really difficult.
So that comes to a point, Steve, that I always have it to myself. So people talk when, especially like reissues of records come out now, and you get comments like, "This sounds digital. This sounds compressed." So now that do you think people actually realize they don't know what they're talking about when they talk compression or dynamic range, what that actually means?
They don't know, but the problem is, how would they know? In other words, you can't really blame them. It's just such a part of music, compression and equalization and processing, that it becomes the norm. And an engineer friend of mine gave me a great line about dynamic range compression. He said, everything is compressed. It's just that some of it is done more tastefully than others, right? So the ones that are more tastefully done, those are those ones that even if you're a pretty extreme audiophile, you can enjoy, right? It's just when they're complaining rightfully so about compression, they mean compression. It's just like brick wall, that everything is at 0 dB all the time. That's nasty, no matter how you look at it. But on the other hand, audiophiles of a certain age love Led Zeppelin, and Led Zeppelin 1, 2, and 3 are massively compressed, have so much distortion, the bad kind of distortion, not guitar distortion, and they love them. So what that means to me is that if you like the music, if you love the music, you jump right over the line there and say, this sounds good. It sounds good because I like it. In other words, despite its imperfections, I think this is an amazing recording. Led Zeppelin 1 or Led Zeppelin 2, when they're definitely not good sounding recordings. But I can enjoy them because they're part of my youth, they're part of my DNA. But I know that they sound pretty bad. So this is the thing about music and sound and all that, is that it's ephemeral. Like if the guys that were reviewing TVs at CNET, right? They could put a Samsung TV next to a Sony TV, put the same image on both, and you could just look back and forth and see how much those pictures are different, right? But you can't do that with speakers or anything in audio, because audio has a time element to it, right? It's moving, it's changing as you're doing it, right? So you cannot really compare things that way. So, but that's what makes it fascinating, is that audio is working on so many levels. That's what makes it hard to pin down. But that's what makes it good.
One thing that I've been just starting to explore a little bit, and I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on this, is I am focused on jazz, and I've been going early and earlier, and earlier and earlier with formats too. And I am interested in shellac 78 RPM.
Wow.
And I know there's other channels like John DeVore's channel. Sometimes he'll play some shellac, and I've heard like Ken McAuliffe talk about how he's heard like Billie Holiday shellacks that sound outstanding. Is there like a high fidelity component to listening to 78 RPM shellac disc? And I know that's a very small niche, but do you have any experience with that?
I have limited experience. I'm not drawn to that. I'm not drawn to mono in general.
Okay.
But the thing about what Ken is experiencing, now he has this thing about cartridges for that period, these Fairchild cartridges that he he just lucked onto, and that you can hear there's a directness to it and all that. But this is a line I don't cross for whatever reason. The stereo to mono thing. I like that other people like it. I'm not saying anybody's wrong or incorrect for liking it. I'm just saying I don't understand. And part of the problem is that people say that the Sgt. Pepper Beatles record, that the Beatles were involved in the mono mix, but they were completely disinterested in the stereo, because stereo in 1967 when they made the record was not a thing that people were into in England. It was more of an American thing. So the Beatles paid no attention to the stereo mix. Okay, and therefore, to some people, the mono mix is the real one, is the authentic one. This is the one that the Beatles wanted. And I go, okay, I get that. But here's the thing. When the stereo version came out in 1967, not so much over speakers, but over headphones, hearing it in stereo was mind-blowing. Like, wow, that is so cool. It was actually real. I don't care whether the Beatles were involved or not. It was a very creative use for stereo in 1967. So in 1967, completely dismissed the mono thing. I didn't know about the Beatles' approval back in those days. But all these decades later, I do listen to the mono. I think it just doesn't work for me, because I've heard this stereo, the original stereo mix, up until like 2017 or something. That's the one for me. The original stereo mix, the remastered, remixed version for the 50th anniversary of Sgt. Pepper, where they made a stereo mix that was with the same balances as the original mono mix. That was the logic of it. And I go, well, yeah, I could see that it sounds better in some ways, but I don't care, because the one I've been listening to for the previous 50 years, that's the one that's imprinted on me, right? So I'm happy with that one, despite its imperfections. But wait, I just want to finish about mono. Is that, to me, we go through life and we hear the world all around us. We hear spatial relationships just, for most people, subconsciously don't understand what's happening, but that's the way they perceive the world sonically, right? When you're listening to mono, to me, all of this is subjective. You're listening to all of that spatiality, compressed into this little ball, and now it's mono. So I use this line, it's like listening to music through a hole in the wall. You're listening to this thing that was once spatially large into now this spatially small thing. Again, subjectively, in my opinion.
I think for me, it's a case-by-case basis. Like I recently got a Portrait in Jazz Bill Evans mono,
Okay.
and the way the trio goes in and out of trading their solos, when you
Okay.
listen to it in mono, to me it sounds very like edgy with how they interplay and kind of take over the space. Where when it's in a stereo format, it just sounds more like a traditional trio, and you can kind of place the instrumentation. And when
Okay.
somebody goes out, it doesn't really change the dynamics elsewhere. So that I feel like it's really that's an example where I do feel like it the mono is a different, cool, kind of almost kind of avant-garde sounding experience.
Hmm.
But other things, like if you have like a quintet and it's a mono, it's just like a straight ahead bop session, I would probably prefer the stereo for that. So I think for me, it's kind of a case by case basis on how the music is. And then generally with these old recordings, if they can get so expensive, I can get it in mono or stereo, whichever one I can get, I'll grab it. But I
You
did.
can always play it in mono. You can play the stereo in
That's
mono.
true. That's true. Yeah, that's absolutely true, and it probably sounds exactly the same. So
No, I don't think so. I think the balance is
that's a
probably
question. Yeah. So
different.
if you use a mono switch compared to getting a vinyl LP pressing that was cut in mono, is there a huge variance between that experience, do you think?
I would imagine it's not something I've really done, because I'm just not drawn to mono, so I haven't
Okay.
done that much experimentation. Although I do think one of the funniest things about mono is that people almost never listen to mono over one speaker. And I am
Oh.
fascinated by that. I have a friend in San Francisco who has, I think, like 1,000 mono blue notes. He's really, that's like 80% of his listening time is to mono recordings. And he absolutely refuses to play them over one speaker. I think that is so weird.
Just to wrap up on the mono thing, Steve, let's say, do you think that listening it just off two speakers. You made some videos about like close listening, for example. Do you think in a larger room, farther from the speakers or listening close, does it change the impact a mono recording can have on one?
Thing about listening in a large space or a small space, the further you are from the speaker, the more room reflections you hear. And the closer you are to the speaker, the more sound you're hearing directly from the speaker. A much higher percentage of sound coming from the speaker and a lower percentage of sound just reverberating in the room. So it's a very different experience. I mean, depending on the room, you may love the reverberation in the room. That's cool, but it depends a lot on the room. I mean, some rooms just sound bad, too reverberant. You see, it's an interesting thing about reverberation in rooms, right? When people listen to each other in an average room, they're not thinking about the reverberation in the room, right? But if you put a microphone between two people talking and then record that sound, you hear how reverberant it really is. And what is the difference? It's not that the microphone is picking up more reverberation. It's just that the microphone is let's say, stupid, right? It just picks up the sound that's occurring in the room. When human beings listen to each other talking in a room, unless it's a very reverberant room, your brain basically, let's say, processes out the reverberation because it's focused on listening to the other person talking, right? And that is a big part of this, is that a lot of what's going on in your vision and certainly in your ears has been processed by your brain to highlight important information, just reduce the irrelevant stuff and push it back. It's like why when you're at a party and there's all these people talking around you that you can hear the person you're talking to, and you're disregarding everything else as much as you possibly can. That's what your brain is attempting to do.
So I did have a question about the term audiophile, and kind of my lay understanding for a while was just it was somebody who wanted to hear like the ultimate sound, where I would like to challenge that and kind of get your opinion on this. Is it more that you or the person is obsessed with the sound? So if it is like an older recording, like knowing about the recording techniques of Rudy Van Gelder, the microphones, understanding how it was processed and pressed that plastolite, and then what it's being reproduced on, even though that may not be as good as a Music Matters pressing of Blue Note, but kind of getting that, hearing it, learning about it, understanding the nuances and differences between that and a new pressing. Can it extend to that, just a more kind of obsession about the reproduction piece of it, where it's still about the technology, but it's not
Or
necessarily about the ultimate piece of it. What do you think?
or or would be more focused on the gear than what the recording itself?
You went there. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, to do the first part first, I think some audiophiles are certainly in that category. I think an audiophile is any person. I have a really basic way of saying you're an audiophile or you're not an audiophile. And it comes down to this. It's first of all, it's not the gear, it's the person themselves. A audiophile is a person who actually likes music enough they can listen to music without multitasking.
Okay.
Reading, talking, cooking, whatever. That they spend some time, not all of it necessarily, but some of the time when they really are into it, that they can just close their eyes and listen. They are then, by definition, they are then an audiophile because they're listening. I have this button that I wear sometimes that says, I listen. And I have that button on because it provokes conversations with people on the street, right? So people who listen are automatically in the category, because most people don't, that they would want to make it sound better. But ultimate or the best or anything, this is not part of the equation, because really there is no such thing, right? You can just keep chasing that. But once you cross over from non-listening, from background listening to listening, then you're in that category where you care enough to say, maybe I should get better speakers, maybe I should get a better cartridge or something. But ultimate, the best, whatever, that's just not, that's not part of the thing as I see it. I mean, a couple of years ago, I interviewed a guy, Yale, I'll say his name, Yale Eveslevin. He owns Luwakabop, the record company. And we have since become friends. And I started doing the interview in his apartment. And I asked, as I not always, but usually ask people, are you an audiophile in the beginning of the interview? And I asked him if he was an audiophile, and this is what he did. He put up his hands and blocked his face and said, "No, no, I'm not an audiophile. Stop, stop, stop." And I stopped and I said, "You could say no. It's okay. You don't have to say yes." So I said, "Let's start again." So we start again. I said, "Are you an audiophile?" And he said, "No, I'm not an audiophile." And I said, "Yeah, but here's the thing. In your room, you have about 10,000 LPs. You have weird shit turntables. I don't even know what they are. Amplifiers all over the place. You have all this stuff that and really cool all-tech horn speakers. You have all this stuff that an audiophile would have. You know, this looks like an audiophile's apartment here, but you are not an audiophile." And he said, "No." And what he meant was he doesn't identify with audiophiles, the obsessiveness about getting better sound and all that stuff. He is, and the weird thing is he is obsessive about it. He just can't let himself be categorized as an audiophile. You know, he thinks
Yeah.
it's demeaning to be an audiophile. So it's like pretty weird. So in the years that we've known each other, it's like an ongoing joke that he'll occasionally just pop on in a conversation and say, "I'm not an audiophile." And I say, "Yeah, but you seem like one." It's pretty weird. But I think that people are on a journey as an audiophile, or they can just get a nice sounding system and stop and live happily ever after, or they can keep trying to get better this or better that, or getting better pressings and stuff like that. I think everybody does it their own way. And of course, there are people that have crazy expensive hi-fis and, like 12 LPs or something. That happens, and people like to focus on that and say it's all about the gear. You don't really care about music, as if that's a problem. It's not a problem. It's their money. They
Sure.
spend it as they please. So if you're into gear more than audio, good for you. I mean, people buy, collect things. They collect, cars, they collect, golf clubs. They don't actually use them all the time. They just collect them because they're fascinated by the thing, So some people are fascinated by audio, and they have lots and lots of it. I don't see that as a bad thing at
Yeah.
all.
And it's interesting. We have our discussion boards and reviews and everything. It's so funny. Most of the people that collect records, they seem to care about the system overall, but they always are ready to dismiss. Oh, I don't have money. I don't want to invest on that. I don't want to think about it. Oh, I have a mediocre system. I'm happy with that. But this record sounds amazing, or that record sounds like crap. It's interesting to see that dynamics being played. People
But don't you think
dismiss
the
the
thing
gear.
about I think my impression of record collectors, and I have lots of records, but I'm not a collector, is that they obsess about like the condition of the jacket. And they, is this the first pressing? This, which record plant it was pressed in, et cetera, et cetera. I don't relate to that. And, good for them. But the thing is, uh, collecting records to find like the best copy of an album that you really love, well, that's cool. Each their own again. I don't. I just, whatever copy I have, if I'm happy with that, I never need to buy another one, unless I lose it or, so. But anyway, you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I don't like to nail these things down. I think it's all very personal, But I am fascinated by the idea of people get hung up on masters, especially people who do reel-to-reel tape, like, "Oh, this was copied from the master." That is like a weird concept, that to think that you got this tape that came from the master. That's pretty tough. The only famous musicians that I know where you can be sure that there is the master, seems to me, is the Beatles, because the Beatles masters essentially never leave Abbey Road. They are there under lock and key. The Rolling Stones, their masters are all over the world. Copies of copies of copies of copies of copies. They never actually got that nailed down. And most bands don't really have control of their masters anyway. So they just copy, copy, copy. And so we don't know what the master is.
So I know we've been going for a little bit. I think we just have maybe one or two more questions, but
Okay.
for 2025, have you planned out anything for the channel? Anything new that you're thinking about incorporating? Anything like that?
No, not really. I mean, it happens as it happens.
Yeah.
But my feelings of are even more deep now about having a system that it's not about perfect or anything. It's about chasing this idea of connecting with the music. The system that you feel more connected with it is better. You know, Nelson Pass, who has two companies that he designs for. His main company is called Pass Labs. It's been around for a very long time. And his other company is called First Watt. And he's the designer of all the stuff that comes out of both of those companies. And the Pass Labs amplifiers and stuff are designed to basically drive anything and sound really good. They're over there. With First Watt, he makes these very quirky amplifiers in very limited numbers of 100 amps or 200 amps. And they don't drive anything. They're usually very limited in what they can sound good with. But with the right speaker, they sound amazing. Because he likes designing circuits. He's like, oh, I got this idea. Oh, I want to try this thing. So he makes an amplifier just to express and put into physical form an idea for a circuit that's never existed before. And I have a bunch of those amplifiers because I'm into that thing of not wanting, I don't care about having something that's universal. I care about something that has a personality. It's how much of the sound is the designer's expression of what I think sound is, you know. So that's not going to fit everybody's tastes or needs, but for the right kind of person, it's like a person who collects 78 records, you know, it's not about chasing the same kind of system as someone who is only playing, you know, CDs or streaming or something. Those are very opposite requirements. So again, everybody's got to figure that out on their own.
Yeah, that's part of the fun.
Yeah, oh, it's definitely part of the fun. You know, the thing with tubes, how tubes, you know, Macintosh stopped making tube electronics in the early 70s. They said, well, transistors are perfect. You know, they're so much better than tubes and they don't run as hot and they're better, 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 better. And then, you know, 20 years later, enough people say, well, make a special edition of the 275 amp or something. And they made it and people loved it and everything. We say, well, wait, it doesn't sound as good as the stuff that we make. No, we just like that sound, you know. So yes, it's not about better. I mean, here's the thing. This is a very important part for me because it illustrates something. When the CD was introduced in 1982, well, before I ever heard digital, I assumed that digital audio would sound so much more realistic because all of the problems that people had been living with analog tape and LPs, all of those problems were just gone, not better, 1000% completely obliterated, probably. Like tape hiss and noise, no, that doesn't occur in digital. Speed variations, wow, and flutter and rumble and all that stuff, nope, not part of digital at all. Stereo separation, vastly better in digital than it is in mono. Dynamic range, vastly larger than analog, right? Every way, digital was better than analog. And then I heard digital, and I didn't run from the room screaming, saying, oh, it sounds terrible. I just said, but no, it doesn't. The piano doesn't sound more like a piano. Drums don't sound more like drums. People don't sound more like people singing. No, all of the things, the limitations of analog had nothing to do with its weakness or its strength. It's just a different way of capturing sound. And digital, despite all of its advantages of being perfect and better, didn't add anything to making music sound more real, more like people playing together in a room. That was a turning point for me. And that was one of the reasons I became so anti measurements and stuff, is because the things that you're measuring are not correlating to what things sound like. It's way more complicated than that.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing that. I, I just wanted to thank you for coming on the channel. This was fun. You are welcome to come back anytime you'd like.
Thank you.
Hope to do this again in the future. Felipe, any final thoughts?
Um, I was thinking just the last question, Steve.
Okay.
Uh, not not that I like to make a list, but if you could like pick three records that you want to keep it forever, if you have to choose like
Oh, no.
two records from your shelves, like to
Oh,
keep them. What?
oh man, I gotta that's something I can't do spontaneously. Well, I mean, I could try. I mean, One of the greatest things about having a large record collection is that it represents your whole lifetime of whatever you have left, right? Of everything you've ever loved, right? So I love just exploring my collection. I purposely don't have them in really good order. It's very confusing even to me. So when I'm trying to find a record that I'm looking for, I wind up finding other records that I wasn't looking for. I think, oh, wow, that's really cool. I got to play that record, you know?
Mhm.
So the randomness of it, because they're all records that I personally picked, right? So
Mhm.
that's a big part of it. So, I mean, I think, it's across the well, I'm looking at it, is uh, Sly and the Family Stone's record, There's a Riot Going On. I don't know if you guys know that record, but it has an American flag, a
Mhm.
section of American flag, and the stars are spinning. And that record represents that time. And that's what records do, right? They represent the time that they were recorded in. And that
Mhm.
record of this period of political upheaval in the United States, 1969 or so, 1970, it's in that record. You look at that record, you just look at that jacket and say, yeah, that's why the stars are spinning, which
Mhm.
would make it very timely right now. So that would certainly be up there. I think Gil Evans, Out of the Cool. I love Gil Evans. He was the man for me. I mean, his approach to jazz was he was like Ellington, the next generation. He took it further and made it, in that sense, more modern sounding.
Mhm.
And my first jazz record was Thelonious Monk, big band and quartet.
Mm.
And I don't even remember how I bought it or why I wanted it, but I thought, oh, jazz, I should get into jazz. It's 1963 or something. And I get this record and I take it home. And it was one of those every day when I came home from school, I played the record over and over and like a pop record. It just like reached me in a way that other jazz at that age at that age for me, didn't. There was something about his rhythm, and the way he just pounds away on the piano. I
Yeah.
was like, it spoke to me. So I don't want to pick any Monk record because I like a lot of them, but
Mhm.
he really reached me deeply. So, I used to joke when I worked at CNET that my middle name was Sphere, like
Yeah.
Thelonious Sphere. And when I was on that talk show, I would say, please refer to me as Sphere. And yeah, Monk and I definitely have some kind of connection going on.
Actually, that talk show you mentioned, it's a comedy show, 404.
Yeah.
If you look at your YouTube channel, I was looking at it before the interview, your first video is actually you telling a joke. Do you remember?
Right, right, right. The joke, right.
Yeah, it's like, no, I didn't get them from my mother. She's old school and collects
Right,
CD.
right, right, yeah. The LPs, yeah. Oh, your mother must be into LPs. She said she's no, no, no. She's into it. Yeah. I can't. I always mangle that joke. But yeah,
Yeah.
my first video, which is like a minute and a half long, is that joke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know if I actually told jokes on the 404. It was just a funny trip. That's what it was mostly.
oh,
I think I mean, I'm drawn to humor, and I think that seeing the humor in life and in audio and stuff, because people take it too seriously, audio and music. It's not that serious. It should be fun,
yeah.
and make you happy and smile and stuff. Oh, I just have room for one more here about jazz. One of the other people I was really into when I was a kid was Larry Coryell.
Okay.
And I went to see Larry Coryell many times at the Village Gate. And this is when he had Elvin Jones in his band. And because he was around my age, he played electric guitar with feedback and distortion. I don't know of any other jazz musician at that time that did it, played electric guitar with feedback and distortion. So I related to it. And then many years later, he made a bunch of records for Chesky,
Oh,
and it was fantastic. Like to meet one of my childhood jazz heroes, hang out with Larry Coryell. And Larry Coryell was just on this trip, he died practically on stage, like that was his life, was playing. I think people who were, somebody like him who wasn't a musician to be rich and famous, and have groupies and stuff. It was just that's what he did. That's what he was put here for, was to make music.
Mm.
And he made this record for Chesky called the Coriels with his two sons, Raleigh and Julian. And making this record, and Larry tells David Chesky that Morale sings, and he says, "Oh yeah, he's going to do Goodbye Pork Pie Hat." And when Morale opened his mouth, he sounded black. Like,
Mm.
there's this white kid, sounds black, right? He's got this amazing voice. So we get to talking, and they said to me, "Well, we want you to write the liner notes for this record."
All right.
And I said, "Oh, I'm honored. I'd love to do that." And then Larry tells me that when he went to play the Fillmore East, he's working the Fillmore, and Morale was a year old. And he said, "So I bring Morale with me, but I didn't have a baby because I didn't have a babysitter. So I left Morale in the dressing room with somebody who worked at the Fillmore to take care of him while I was on stage." He says, "I come off stage, I go back to the dressing room, and who's playing with Morale? Jimi Hendrix." And he said, "And that's why he sounds black." So I said, "Well, that's a good story, but I don't want to tell that story. You got to tell that story." So I helped him write the story. But no, that was a trip. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those things that people who are into different kinds of music, and the people that get into jazz, or it's a certain kind of person.
And even when, we have the live stream, we speak with a lot of jazz enthusiasts, and everybody kind of finds their own way. Like
Yeah,
I kind of focus on a particular style of it, and other people focus on completely different. Like it is kind of a large genre over the decades,
yeah.
and you can definitely get lost in it, and it's pretty fun. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you again for coming and sharing these stories. We really appreciate it. This was really fun.
Yeah, sure.
So for everyone watching, please like and subscribe to the channel. Please share this, and we'll see you guys next time.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve.